Welcome to the Firepreneurs Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff McDowell Jr.
And I'm Bennett Grove.
Between us, we have 20 years of firefighting experience.
And over 15 years of experience building, growing, and leading small businesses.
Each episode, we get after it by discussing leadership, life, and development.
We'll also unpack the wins and losses that we've experienced along the way.
You ready, big dog?
I'm ready, my man.
Let's get it.
Welcome to another episode of the Firepreneurs Podcast. On this episode, we're going to do something a little bit different than we've done in the past because I recently sat down for an interview with the team from the FireDawg Podcast. And these fire dogs are actual military firefighters currently serving on active duty in the Air Force. But they put together a podcast called the FireDawg Podcast where they highlight firefighters, fire officers, individuals that support the fire protection world. And they had me on to talk about my experience as an Air Force firefighter, as well as my experience running and building FireDawg's junk removal. And so we share some leadership lessons, some parallels that I learned while serving in the military and building the company. So I hope you enjoy, but we're going to cut that episode into this episode of the podcast. So have a listen, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.
This is the FireDawg Podcast.
The views and opinions presented on today's episode are those of the speaker and do not necessarily represent the views of the Department of Defense or the United States Air Force.
Welcome, my name is Matt Wilson. Thank you for joining us for episode 32 of the FireDawg Podcast. Before we get into the episode, don't forget to check out our website, firedawg.us. On the site, you'll find new podcast episodes and articles from people across the fire service. So go check out the site, save it to your favorites, and if you want to write an article to be featured on the site, click Contribute at the top of the page. Lastly, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and give us a rating and review to let us know how we're doing. Our guest today is a former Air Force firefighter turned entrepreneur. He served on active duty in the Air National Guard and most recently as a civilian at Grissom Air Reserve Base in Indiana. He's the founder, owner, and chief executive officer of FireDawg's Junk Removal, a growing junk removal business in Indiana, and recent recipient of the Better Business Bureau's 2020 Business of Integrity Award. It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Bennett Grove. Well, Mr. Bennett Grove, I appreciate you joining me, man. It's good to have you.
Thanks for having me, Matt. Appreciate it.
So I follow you a little bit on Facebook, and it's funny when we were developing we were branding the podcast and looking for names. And of course, we're doing a lot of Google searches, and I Google searched FireDawg, I think I was looking for images, to develop a logo. And I kept finding FireDawg Junk Removal, Indiana. I was like, well, what, and then it had a firefighter logo and everything else like that. I was like, wow, that's, this person must have been a firefighter at some point in the military, and didn't think much of it. I'm like, well, we definitely don't want to steal their content. And so I really liked that logo. I was like, oh, that's awesome, man. That'd be awesome to use that. But of course we didn't want to take the logo. But anyways, it's,
Thank you.
It's kind of coming full circle. It's kind of funny to be able to talk to you and have you on the podcast.
Yeah, man. Appreciate it. Thanks for not stealing the logo and the name. Appreciate that. And thanks for having me on. Hope I can add value to the listeners.
Yeah. Again, like we were talking before I started recording, I just like to highlight the fact that you are a prior military member, prior military firefighter, prior firefighter, now business owner, and kind of talk about that journey to owning a business, opening in a business, kind of the whole experience. And, I'll ask you a few questions to walk us through that, but that was the idea here.
Yeah, happy to talk about it. For sure. Was a Air Force firefighter for 6 years. I was a firefighter in total for 17. I started my business in 2011 alongside another FireDawg who's no longer in the business with me. But we started it in 2011. But yeah, so I was on active duty in the Air Force, and I was in the Guard after active duty. So I spent 6 years total. And I was really inspired to join the military after the events of 9/11 and the invasion in Iraq. I finally enlisted. I was in college at the time. But I always had aspirations of becoming a firefighter back in high school. And I was always, I followed my buddy's dad was a firefighter, and he had a business on his days off. And so I kind of, really gravitated to him. And it's like, man, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a firefighter, and I'm going to have a side hustle. And that was kind of always the vision. And so becoming a firefighter was always my dream. It was my dream job. And so when I got to go into the military and be a firefighter, it was like the best of both worlds, because I always said growing up that if there was ever a conflict in our country or in the world, and I was of age, I was going to join the military and serve. I just had a calling to serve. And so when those events happened, it was like, okay, time to put up, it's either put up or shut up. And so I joined and wanted to serve, and I got to be a firefighter in the process, which was awesome. So my firefighting career was, it was everything. It shaped me. It was so impactful on my life. I'm 38 now, but a lot of the things I learned as a firefighter continue to serve me today as a leader of a home services business. So, I look back on my time as a firefighter and just I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity to be a firefighter and serve my country at the same time. But that's a quick bio on me. So, 2011 or 2011 is when I started the business. 2003 is when I enlisted. And my last shift as a firefighter was 9/11 last year. So 9/11/2020, I hung up the boots and no longer a full-time firefighter anymore and full-time running my business.
No, cool. I didn't know you were doing the firefighter gig up until last year. So I think we may have talked a little bit. I don't know, but I've been following you on Instagram for at least a year at this point. And one thing I do notice, and I don't know who runs your social media, but there's a lot of parallels in kind of the principles or the values of your business in the military, or specifically Air Force Fire Protection. Even the way that you the titles of the employee positions, it seems, is even kind of similar. And you have a fitness center for the employees to work out in and stuff like that. Yeah. It's all pretty cool. It's very familiar. Just following you on Instagram, it seems familiar to me just looking at you.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, I think there's a lot of crossovers. I have a couple buddies out there in the fire world. Scott Smoot was one of my staff sergeants when I was active duty, and he gives me crap every now and then. He's like, man, if you do one more thing that looks like the fire department, he goes, I'm gonna send you to counseling, because he says I'm so ate up, But that's the thing, is like what we learn as firefighters and what you learn in the military. So many of those principles cross over into the right way to run a home services business. Our guiding principle in our company is treat every customer the way you would want your family to be treated. And our mission statement is build leaders and pursue growth while providing award-winning service. And both of these are, tools in our metaphorical tool belt out there running this business that help us make decisions on a day-to-day basis. But both of those really go back to what's instilled in you when you go into the military. You go through basic and you go through tech school or whatever the case may be. And then you go into the fire service. It's very similar principles, the things that we learn and that are instilled in us, the way you treat your patients, and the way that you respond to situations. It's treating people the right way and the desire to serve, and there's so many crossovers and parallels and the right way to run a business and your service as a firefighter. But I always thought one of the coolest things about being a firefighter was you got paid to work out. Gym time was good time for me. I loved it every day. And so I always thought that was real cool to get paid to work out. I always felt like we were, tactical athletes as firefighters. It was the closest thing to being a pro athlete, because you got to play the intramurals and have fun. And so the camaraderie, the being around the team and the fire department team and, doing those kinds of things. I always thought getting paid to work out was just such a privilege. And so I always had dreams and visions of in my company, once I got it to a size where I could afford to, I wanted to be able to pay our team members to work out. And so, now we have a gym at our shop and we have a bonus for our team. So if they hit the gym 3 times a week or 3 hours a week, they log it and it gets recorded. They get a bonus every pay period of $100. So basically at the end of the year, $2,600 just to hit the gym and stay in shape. And so it's a win-win on both sides. The team member stays in shape and the company gets team members that are staying in shape. So, similarly in the fire department, as like some people don't take advantage of the gym time and it always has repercussions on their health. So, we always try to encourage that in the company.
Yeah, that is great. Having opportunity to work out during work and actually getting paid for it, man, that's pretty awesome philosophy. It sounds like a great company to work for. So you mentioned that you're in the military for 6 years, correct?
Yep.
And a little bit of time in the Guard.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about your military experience. I mean, you pretty much covered it all, but what rank did you achieve? What bases were you at?
Yeah, so as far as my service places I was at, I went to Eielson Air Force Base right after tech school. I grew up in Indiana. I grew up in the Midwest, and it was, I come out of Texas, and my first duty station was Eielson. And so I remember getting off the plane, and they didn't have the nice warm tarmac. You got off the plane, walked down to the ground, and then you walked in the terminal. And so the first day I got off the plane, it was negative 28 degrees. It was January 4th. And, it was like, welcome to Alaska. So, but yeah, I got picked up from the airport. I think it was like Sergeant Glosson or Sergeant Grady, I think they're both civilians now. But, that was my first duty station. And I met a lot of my friends today. That's the cool thing about the fire service, as you know. Once you make a friend in the fire service, you're always 1 to 2 degrees away from another person that knows another person, So a lot of my buddies that I made on active duty are still buddies today. But yeah, I spent 2 years there, and then I went into the Guard, went back to Indiana, went into Terre Haute Air National Guard Base. Used to be the 181st Fighter Wing, and they got bracked. So they lost their fighter mission, they lost their fire department. And so my last year, which was my 6th year, that base closed down. But they gave us a farewell gift as they closed down the Air National Guard Base. They sent us to Curacao on a 6-month TDY, which was, a little heaven on earth on half of the island. The other half of the island was filled with nut jobs and terrorists, and it was a third world country, but it was still beautiful. And so it was a nice way to go out of my Air Force career. But yeah, that sums it up, man. That was the 6 years. So 2 in Alaska. Loved it. Went down to Anchorage quite a bit. Went to rescue school at Elmendorf, so I got to spend some time down there. And that was the locations that I went to in the military. And then once I got out of the military, I went to I worked at Camp Atterbury Fire Department, worked at Fort Campbell, and then after Fort Campbell, I went to Grissom. And so I got to Grissom in 2010, and I worked there up until just last year. So that sums up kind of the places I went to as a firefighter. But that's 17 years of life, man. I summed up in about 2 minutes.
Well, tell us about your business a little bit. So, we talked a little bit, opening it up, that you have a business, but, what's the name of it? What services do you provide? How many employees? What's the business all about?
Yeah, so the name of the company is FireDawg's Junk Removal. And, it's familiar with a lot of people in the fire department will be able to relate to this. It's just some good old-fashioned grunt work. We pick things up, put things down, we tear things down. And, essentially we do the tough, dirty jobs that people could do themselves, but they don't want to. And so, a lot of stuff that we do, we tear down sheds, tear down swing sets, old hot tubs, clean out basements, clean out garages, clean out hoarders. So, that's in the nutshell what we do. Started in Indianapolis, and I did it on my days off shift from the firehouse. Again, I did it with a buddy of mine that was a firefighter with me. He's no longer in the business, but we started it in 2011, and days off shift, we would do it all. We would answer the phones, go out and do the work, and we had some help from some other guys at the fire department there with us that would work part-time, and just slowly started chipping away and trying to drum up some business. And so that was in 2011, serving Indianapolis while we were still full-time firefighters. And then, fast forward to today, it's 12 truck operation. We have an location in Indianapolis, location in Fort Wayne. We run a couple trucks out of Fort Wayne. Then we just opened a location in Bloomington, which is just southwest of Indianapolis. And so, trying to, my big long-term goal is to be able to service the entire state of Indiana. So I'm going to keep building and pursuing growth inside of the company, both top line revenue, and hopefully learn a lot of leadership lessons along the way, because the last 10 years have been filled with them, filled with leadership lessons and humbling lessons. Made a lot of mistakes along the way, but it's been an exciting journey. And, going through it, sometimes I almost wish a lot of people would start their own business, because you just learn so many valuable lessons along the way. But I know that's not possible, but when you're responsible for other people and their ability to, earn and provide for their families, it's a humbling experience, and it definitely takes on a different level of responsibility. But, it's one that the military and firefighting make you uniquely qualified to do, because you're used to that kind of pressure. And so, So yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell what the business is today and where we're at today and where we started, and hope that answered the question there.
Yeah, it did, certainly. And pretty successful so far, it sounds like to me. And I listened a little bit to your podcast, and by the way, he has a podcast for all those listeners that might be interested in listening to it. What's the name of the podcast?
The name of the podcast is Firepreneurs. So
Firepreneurs, that's right. Yeah, and I've listened to a few episodes, and I remember listening to, I think, one of the first ones, and you talked through the journey, and there was a lot of trials and tribulations starting out. It wasn't easy going, it doesn't sound like, but it sounds like you've been incredibly successful up to this point.
A lot of pain along the way. That's kind of one of the inspirations for the Firepreneurs Podcast is, I think that firefighters having a side hustle is kind of like a time-honored tradition. But what you don't hear a lot of is firefighters that really get beyond that owner-operator mindset, where it's just kind of, when it's an owner-operator, it's more like a second job. But I wanted to do the podcast to kind of help other firefighters that have a business on their days off kind of squash some of those self-limiting beliefs, which some of those self-limiting beliefs is like, I can't scale this business. I'm a full-time firefighter. I can just build a little side hustle, right? But the reality is when you learn systems and processes and you figure out a way to work on the business and not in it, you can scale a business on your days off. And so the podcast is really just, trying to teach people through a ton of mistakes that I made along the way, but also hopefully along the way help people lose some of those self-limiting beliefs, because those things are real, not just when you're running a business, but just also when you're pursuing your career, right? Sometimes you can talk yourself, once you get between the ears, you can talk yourself out of a lot of things. Living inside your head's a dangerous place sometimes. So, the podcast is just there to let other people who might be in similar positions, know that, hey, somebody else has gone through it too. Here's how we push through. Here's how you might push through, and things of that nature.
So I'd like to hit on some of the mistakes and lessons. And, obviously you have a whole podcast dedicated to highlighting those things. And I don't want to have you hit all of them, but I'd like to hit on a few of them. But my first question is, when you first jumped into this, what is the marketplace like? So actually, before we even go there, what got you into junk removal?
Phew. I guess I was really kind of intrigued by it. When I got out of active duty, I used my VA home loan. I was single, so I got out of active duty and I was in the Guard. I used my VA home loan and I bought a duplex. And I lived in the crappy unit and I rented out the nice one to college kids, and we kind of fixed it up. And then I ended up selling that, and I rolled the money from that into buying this condemned, dilapidated building that was walking distance to Indiana State. And this thing was about to get torn down, but I was like, hey, I'll buy that, and we bought it and we gutted it down to the studs. And, I'll go ahead and let you know that it worked out. We ended up turning it into a 6-unit apartment building. But at the time, it was that was almost my entrepreneurial journey right there. Was I could have failed on that building. But we gutted it down to the studs. And in doing so, I had to rely on help from other people, because at the time I was still in the Guard. I was a full-time college student. I was a full-time firefighter at Indiana State. So this at the Guard base, they had a state fire department. So I worked for the fire department as a state employee. And so I had bought this building, so I was still kind of an entrepreneur too, So I was super busy, and I had to have people help me along the way. So I was hiring out some trades like plumbing, electrical, but I also was having some people help me with the demo, because it was I only had me and another buddy kind of doing the tear out. And this company that I hired, I couldn't find anybody in Terre Haute. And I couldn't get good help. But this company I got a hold of, man, it was like Uncle Buck. They would pull up to the job site. The truck would backfire. Half the time it wouldn't show up at all. When it did show up, they were always late. And I just remember kind of saying to myself, man, if I ever get out of doing these rental properties, I'm going to start a professional demolition / hauling business, And so fast forward, when I graduated college and I took the job at Fort Campbell, at the time I had 6 apartment buildings and 21 apartments. And so I kind of built up this nice little real estate business, but I had partners, and, there was one of my failings along the way, as I partnered with some guys that the relationship just wasn't very good. We had different visions. And so starting with beginning with the end in mind, whenever you go into business, whoever you're going to business with, you got to make sure there's alignment. And in my real estate business, my first couple partners, there wasn't. And so long story short, when I graduated college and I took the job at Fort Campbell, I sold my interest in that real estate company and parted ways with those guys, which is kind of a bummer because it was a nice little business, but lesson learned and moved on. But I always hung on to that like experience with not being able to rely on people to help me with the tear out. So when I got to Grissom in 2011, one of my best friends from active duty had just got picked up at Grissom, and we were just sitting around like, man, let's start a business on our days off. And we were bouncing around all kinds of ideas. And I'd kind of forgotten about that hauling business. And then I saw a documentary on Brian Scudamore. And then I went and talked to my buddy. I was like, this is the business. Let's do it. Let's go pick up other people's junk and trash. And so that's kind of the inspiration, the long story about how I came up with the idea or how we, I should say, came up with the idea for a junk removal and hauling business.
Yeah, that's a great story. And it's kind of funny how the idea fell on you kind of randomly. It's not something that you necessarily aspired to your whole life. Like, I'm going to own a business and this is what it's going to be, and I think you hear that a lot. Well, I don't know if this is a good example to use, but I watch Shark Tank a lot, and it seems that a lot of those contestants on there, it's always a problem in their life that they're trying to solve. Right. Yeah. And that's why they create a product. Well, it sounds pretty similar to your experience, and you had trouble finding people that were reliable in this particular industry. And well, I know I could do well in it, so let's give it a shot, and it's a pretty cool story.
Yeah, thank you.
So I guess I'm curious to know, it sounds like you had some background obviously you had some background in real estate, a little bit of background in managing kind of a business, for lack of a better term, but what was the market like for this particular industry when you first jumped into it? I mean, was it nerve-wracking jumping into this?
It was, I guess that you could say that there was like a level of, nervousness or maybe slight, like a little anxious about what would happen, because, at that time it was 2011 and there wasn't a lot of junk removal and hauling companies out there. There was a lot of chucking trucks, guys that were just driving around old beat up pickup trucks. But there wasn't what there is today, which is more of a professionalized, spin on the business. There's a number of franchises for sale today. And there were a few at that time. But 1-800-GOT-JUNK, for example, is the largest in the world. And they had an operation in Indianapolis. And so, it's funny how there's the scarcity mindset versus the abundancy mindset. And at that time, it was definitely a scarcity mindset. I remember my partner and I were like, man, if we could only get as big as 1-800-GOT-JUNK. And at that time, 1-800-GOT-JUNK was like maybe a 2-3 truck operation. And they had a franchise in the southern part of Indianapolis that had gone out of business. And so there was a level of like uncertainty, like, is this going to work? But at the same time, my partner and I, we knew what we were capable of. We knew what we were about. We were the kind of guys that we would put our heads down and do the hard work. We weren't afraid of it. And so we just knew that we had to go drum up some business. And, I grew up in Speedway on the west side of Indianapolis. And, so fortunately I went out there and started dropping off some business cards and trying to get our name out there. My partner and I did, and we got a job right out the gate. And it was with the Redevelopment Commission in Speedway. And it was funny because the whole business almost didn't happen because my partner, we were loading up a truck and he had a piece of plywood, a 4x8 sheet of plywood, and he was tossing it in the truck. And I was tossing crap in the truck too, because that's what you do. And the wind caught it. And this thing zoomed by my head and missed my temple by like 2 inches. And I just remember like freezing and looking at him, and he was looking at me wide-eyed. He thought I was done, So like, that's the thing about entrepreneurship, is like, there's all these little moments that, might not have even gotten off the ground, and the last 10 years are filled with little forks in the road like that. But that one was kind of a funny one. But yeah, like, so the first job, I almost got aced, with the piece of plywood.
Yeah. That's crazy. What about like the technical learning curve? So, I mean, it's grunt work, like you mentioned earlier. You put stuff in the back of the truck. I assume you take it to the dump, but I imagine there's probably some unseen technical aspects of the job. How to take things apart and what order to do it, how to load the truck. Was there any significant learning curve starting out like that, or you just threw stuff into the back of a truck? Yeah,
I think when you start in a home services business, there's like your trades, your HVAC, your electrical, your plumbing, and so if you grew up and maybe apprenticed on one of those jobs before you went into the fire service, you might be able to start a business like that. But the barrier to entry, if you don't have any of that background experience, is going to be difficult. So, junk removal, other businesses similar to that, like maybe, pressure washing, carpet cleaning, window cleaning, painting, for example. I mean, there's those things that you can kind of stumble your way through it, if that makes sense. And junk removal is definitely one of those things, right? It's grunt work. It's physical manual labor, and not many people want to do that this day and age. So we knew that since we were willing to do that, we already had a leg up. But then the rest of the things that you learn along the way, the fire department uniquely prepared us for. So, a lot of the work that we do, the demo, like, so when we tear down an old shed, or we're cutting up an old hot tub and hauling that away, or, demoing a deck, you're using a lot of the same tools that you use in the fire service. We use sawzalls, chainsaws, pry bars. I mean, there's a number of those tools that you're already used to using. So a lot of that kind of came naturally. And, that being said, like when we rolled up to our first hot tub, we're like, dude, what do we do with this thing? Like, we can't pick that up. We're dumb grunts. We're like, oh, let's go try and pick it up first. Like, that's not going to happen. So then you just default to like, oh, we know how to use the sawzall, But that being said, in fairness, we also, went out there and tried to research what some other companies were doing. There wasn't as much content on the internet at that time as there is today. Like, if you wanted to start a junk removal business, and I'm not revealing any secrets here, you could type in any type of job on YouTube and you'll have a video of somebody doing it. So like in 2021, there's no reason like to fail starting a home services company, because there's pretty much a video out there, tutorial showing you how to do everything. You know what I mean? It's just whether or not you want to go consume the content and then have the gumption to go out there and give it a shot. But back then in 2011, it wasn't like we were starting with no knowledge either. We kind of had some of it instilled in us from the fire department. And then we did a little research to make sure we weren't, screwing it up right out the gate. Right. And we had insurance right out the gate. So in case we did screw something up, we were covered, But there's got to be a level of humility and a willingness to make mistakes. And when you make a mistake, you got to own it, And I think if you go into your home services company with that mindset, you're going to, be able to get pretty far.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. That's probably a staple of being successful as an entrepreneur. And the thing that I was going to mention was the research. If you're willing to do the research and you're willing to be humble and understand that you may not know everything, it's probably the foundational piece of being successful, really.
Absolutely. And it's not something that a lot of people take the time to do. So, when you are willing to do that, you already have a good head start. Yeah.
Well, you've already hit on a couple lessons learned and, some of the struggles early on, but what are some of the bigger mistakes or lessons learned with the business that you feel worth sharing with some military firefighters that may be listening?
Oh, there's so many, man. I think probably the biggest one that I look back on, and I wish. Here's the thing: is I don't really look back and like have regrets, because every mistake made only better prepared me for the obstacles that lied ahead. And as I continue to grow the business, it's not like the obstacles are done; they're just different obstacles, if you know what I'm saying.
Right.
But I think some of the early mistakes, I think in the first year 1, year 2, year 3, some of those early mistakes, sometimes you were making mountains out of molehills. And when you do that, that's when you can really start to doubt your ability, and you start to lose your confidence, and you start to second guess yourself. And I know that I was 100% guilty of that in the year 1, year 2, where, the first 2 years of a business, you're just not going to turn a huge profit. You're going to be grinding, and you're going to put your sweat equity in. And it's in those moments, if you don't have the knowledge or if you don't have the confidence, you can really get inside your own head. And so I think one of the best things that somebody could do that's a fire dog out there thinking about doing a business maybe in phase 2 of their life, like yourself, when you retire, you might start something. Or if you just want to have a side hustle while you're a fire dog, maybe you're a civilian fire dog or you're not in the military anymore. But I would go ahead and start investing in knowledge. Read some books on business. And what you'll find is that a lot of people have already done it and succeeded. And levels of success is subjective, but they push through those obstacles. And so I think a lot of people, you hear these stats about businesses that don't make it past year 1 or year 3 or whatever the case may be. I think the difference between a lot of successful businesses and those that are unsuccessful are the ones that just keep going.
Yeah, persevere.
Just keep going, right? And, early on, I remember somebody told me to read a book. He's another business owner. His business has exploded. He's franchising across the country now. But I had reached out to him early on in my business, and he had told me to read a book called The E-Myth Revisited, and it just talks about entrepreneurship. And I ended up not reading that book till 2014, but I wished I had read it sooner, because anytime you invest in your growth mentally, it's only going to pay dividends in confidence and perseverance when it comes to those tough times. So yeah, I would say one of the early mistakes is I did my research on how to do the thing, how to do the job, how to market the business, but I didn't invest in my personal growth, my professional development as much in the first couple of years. And in hindsight, I wish I'd have done that sooner. And so anybody who's a fire dog out there starting a business, I would do that early on. And, it's just like the fire academy, when you're first going through, and I don't know if you had this experience or not, but I'm sure there's some people out there that could relate in that a fire dog, you're coming out of a basic and you go to the fire academy, and it can feel like intimidating, right? It's this big thing. And I know the structure is different now from when I went through, but people will talk about drags and carries and hose advancements. And then you get out in the ARF pit, they would make it sound like this huge mountain that you had to climb. Right. But then, I don't know, I would see some people graduating, and I would see some of the people walking out of the chow hall, and they had just graduated. And I'm like, man, those guys could do it. Man, if that guy can get through, I'm totally fine. Yeah. There's like that self-limiting belief you have. And then you're like, oh wait, other people have done this. Like this. Yeah,
I can relate to that too, for sure.
It's not a mountain, right? It's just a molehill that you got to stomp. And that's a lot like what business is. It's just,
well, I'm glad you explained that, because I was going to ask you what making mountains out of molehills is, but that explains it well.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. Like I said, I can certainly relate to that. And it happens to this day, or even, in the military, you're always motivated to move to the next rank or to the next base or to the next position. And, I'm sure the same applies for civilian firefighters within the military, or really anybody that's, striving for excellence in their career. Sometimes it seems unachievable, or it looks kind of unrealistic. And when you take it a day at a time and you persevere through those tough times, and, you hit failures, but you get back up and try it again.
Yep.
Sometimes you stand up and look back and realize, that was very achievable, So, and for me, that's kind of like a dopamine dumper. It's almost a motivation to, well, what else do I got? What else I got in the tank? There's so much more that you can achieve than you think. I think our minds place limitations on us.
Yep.
And it's just all about persevering and breaking through those mental limitations.
Yeah, not getting comfortable too, right? Because like once you get to that goal that you set, and then you get there, it's like you can't get comfortable. Now you got to set a new one. So you keep yourself churning.
Right. Always kind of straddle that threshold between being comfortable and uncomfortable, making sure you don't go too far in either one direction. Any other big lessons you think worth sharing on that?
The business world is challenging, but so is just anything really. Like, life is challenging. So knowing that, I don't know if any of our listeners will relate to this, but, at the firehouse, we watched a TV show called The Wire. And there's a scene that's really funny in that show, but it's also like a serious scene where, basically this candidate is becoming mayor, and he had ran this really tough race. And he tells the story about how on his first day, he was kind of walking in the office, the big office, expecting to get like congratulated and like, man, you did it, congratulations, all this hard work, blah, blah, blah. But instead, what he got was the outgoing mayor handed him a bowl, and he says, "What's this for?" He goes, "This is your bowl." And he goes, "Here's your spoon. And every day somebody's going to walk through that door right there and dump a big pile of shit in it. And when they do, you're going to have to eat it every day. And when you finish the bowl, the next day is going to have more ready to fill that bowl." And you think about it, it's kind of a funny, cynical way of looking at it. But if you exchange, that for obstacles, and you fill that every day, that bowl is going to get filled with obstacles, and you just get your mind wrapped around being ready to eat those obstacles every day, and know that no matter what that day's obstacles are or how hard they were, once you get past them, there's still more around the corner. Once you train your mind and get your mind prepared for that, the obstacles that face you in business are all surmountable. And so then it just becomes a matter of, again, back to time and perseverance, time, consistency, and perseverance. And that's what will push you past, the SBA, those critical, like, first year, 3 years, 5 years, get you into year 10. It's just getting your mind calloused, as to steal that from David Goggins, right? Callousing your mind and preparing you for every day you're going to face obstacles. And just get ready to eat them.
That's good advice for life, really.
It's helped me quite a bit, and not just in business, but in life, trying to get my mind ready to deal with those obstacles every day.
Yeah, that's great advice. I find myself doing the same thing. What helps me is reading history or listening to history or, and seeing how absolutely good we have it in the world today, and using that perspective. And anyways, to use your metaphor of, that bowl of shit that you get delivered every day, it's like, well, it's nowhere near the bowl or the table full of shit that they were dealt during World War II or in Eastern Europe during the Cold War, for example. We are living in the best time in human history and in the best country in human history. And so this bowl is nothing, right? When you put things into perspective. But that's great advice. I'm glad you hit that.
Yeah, man, perspective. Like trench warfare, World War I. Like, come on.
Yeah, exactly.
You gotta keep it in perspective. You're right. Studying history is so important because you forget a lot of the stories, and a lot of the stories that are unfolding today have already unfolded in some form or fashion in the past. So it's just keep it in perspective. It's good advice.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about maybe lessons, principles, values that you picked up in the military that translated well into running your business. Is anything specific that comes to your mind?
I was Air Force, man. So, integrity first, service before self, excellence in all we do. Can't help it. Those things were instilled in me in basic. I carried them with me to the fire department. Now, listen, I'm talking about all these things. Like, I was a hooligan when I was, a young airman in a single, and I was a firefighter. Like, it's the coolest job in the world, right? Like, I was trading on that card. I was having fun, but still, like, there's these lessons that you learn, and they just stay with you, and integrity it's still to this day. I give speeches in our company, or I teach a leadership course in our company about integrity and what it means, and the duality of the meaning, and, how do you exercise integrity? And it's still something that, not just in business or in your personal life, it's something that I wish more people would just talk about, because the more you talk about it, the more commonplace it becomes, and it becomes like one of those standards of living. But you can see all around you when people aren't exercising it, right? And so in our company, it's something that we stand on, and it, recently this past year, one of the biggest accomplishments we've had so far is we won the Business of Integrity Award by the Better Business Bureau. So, putting in the 9 years of trying to teach the things that we learned in the military and try to put it into a services company, and making 9 years of mistakes, but along the way, getting better each time, each iteration, getting a little bit better than the last, to kind of, the work's not done, mind you, but like, that was kind of a nice culmination of that work to see that award come, with our team. But life has a way of also humbling you, so we win the award, and on the same token, we had some people in our company that weren't exercising integrity, and that comes to light. And so it's no different than a fire department. And if you've worked in enough fire departments, right, there's the firefighter that your kid thinks you are, and then you go to the firehouse, and then there's some guys that are bad apples, bad actors, right? And that's across the board in business and in fire departments and in life, that not everybody is exercising integrity each day. But it's still important to use that and do your best to communicate what it is and how it should be executed. So that's still something every year, and every year going forward, that'll continue to be something that a core value of the Air Force that I continue to try to instill in our young people in our company, because just like in the military, I got guys coming into our company that are 19, 18. I have 18-year-old in my company right now. I have 19-year-olds and I have 29-year-olds, and I have a 52-year-old in my company, right? So I've got all age ranges in there. But some of these young kids, when you go to the military, you're learning structure right away. Some of these kids have never had it. They're coming into our company and have never had structure in their life, period. And so they're learning it for the first time. So we get so used to hearing words like integrity and service and excellence in our service in the military and in the fire department. Well, we can take for granted that some of the young people, like, for example, in our company coming in, we still have to communicate those messages because that might be the first time they're ever hearing it. They didn't have influences in their life talking about those things. So it's still important to beat the drum.
Mm-hmm. And even that, and beyond the values, beyond the core values, I can see some more parallels with the Air Force and your business, specifically with your leadership training, or having to develop kind of the young people of America, or in Indiana where your business is. I think that is probably a pretty valuable thing that we get in the Air Force that we take for granted, that kind of leadership and mentorship and development. It's really instilled into the culture, into the fabric of our service and in the fire service within the Air Force specifically. And you mentioning that you have leadership training and that you host it and you teach your employees, it reminded me of, professional military education a little bit when you talk about it. So it sounds to me that, and I'm sure these are things that you think of, but it sounds to me like your military service was it's a pretty strong foundation that you used when developing and building this business. Yeah,
you can tell I'm pretty unoriginal.
Oh, I mean, if it works, it works, right? I mean, it's and the military is you're talking centuries. I know the Air Force is 1947, but the United States military existed for a few centuries at this point, and there's a whole lot of trials and tribulations and a whole lot of conflicts. And you're talking about experiencing the worst that humanity has to offer, and then having those lessons develop your institution. So why not take what you've learned in the military and apply that to owning a business or even conducting yourself in life? Because what better lessons than, human suffering and warfare, right? And, that's kind of what shaped our professional military education, and the way that we march, or the discipline that we have, the attention to detail that we should have with our uniforms, and the way that we conduct business. There's a lot of parallels, and why not use them if you're a business owner?
Absolutely. And one thing I've learned too is because I've worked with some other businesses in coaching / consulting environment as well. And what I've seen even outside of my company, it's that home services, or just any kind of business, it could be anything. People may not like to have a supervisor or have, somebody that has authority over them, so to speak. But the reality is that I've seen organizations that lack structure, and even some of the hardest, the hard asses, the people that I don't need a supervisor. What I've even found in some of these organizations, they still want structure though. They still want structure and organization because they still want to know that the work they're putting in is part of a bigger plan, And so when I go in some of these other companies that don't have the structure or organization, some of the people in those companies who maybe a class clown, they may be like your stubborn person that I don't need somebody micromanaging me, But what they're also, once you get down to it, one of the things that I've found is that they still want the organization to have structure and discipline, but not like in discipline in the way like you're disciplining someone, but discipline in that people are consistently following the behaviors that lead to the success of the organization. So like your structure and organization are just time tested, and that's, so even in the renegade culture, they still want the company they work for, the organization they work for, to have like a certain level of structure and discipline. And I think the military is just, second to none in teaching us that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, well, it's a necessity for warfare, and if you don't have structure and discipline, then you're gonna fail as an army. I think that's probably a human instinct to want structure and to want direction and leadership and want to know why you're doing what you're doing. I don't think it's not a characteristic of a younger generation to have to explain why. I think human beings want to know why they're doing what they're doing, so that they're motivated to do it and they know what their work is accomplishing. But that's great stuff. So what, if any, recommendations would you give for those in the military now interested or aspiring to be entrepreneurs, and not so much in, we talked about some recommendations earlier on if you're going to start a business. I'm talking about, I guess, how they could set themselves up for success, use the time that they have now in the military to set themselves up for success if they want to open their own business. You talked a little bit about reading, but is there anything else that the military might have to offer?
Yeah, there's little habit forming behaviors. I sincerely believe this, like the little habit forming behaviors you create daily. They may be small, but if you can make them consistent, they add up over time and can lead to massive impact and massive action. So the small, tiny behaviors today repeated in a week to multiple weeks, spinning over into a year, those habit forming behaviors can serve you really well and create massive action down the road. So whether that habit forming behavior right now that you're creating is setting aside a little time each day to do some extra reading, whether that's setting aside a little extra money out of each paycheck into a piggy bank, an account that you don't touch. You set up a small allotment that is, maybe a little nest egg for you to possibly take the entrepreneurial leap when you get out of your out of active duty or you retire, or making some time to each time, or maybe once a week, once a month, writing down and revisiting some goals that you write down for yourself. There's just so much power in doing some of the basics, which is, we believe in goal setting behavior in our company. We have weekly meetings in our company, and at different levels of the organization. So we have a upper management meeting, we have an operations meeting, we have a call center dispatch meeting, but in each one of those meetings each week, it's not like we're getting all corporate, but it's just a goal setting meeting. So like each week we all set goals, and then that goal setting behavior, it's a small incremental gain each week, and so those behaviors are so consistent. So, whether it means setting aside a little money to build up a nest egg, whether it means setting a little time each day to read, or just like getting in the habit of setting goals for yourself, weekly goals, monthly goals, quarterly goals. I think that all those little habit forming behaviors are what's going to make someone successful in the entrepreneurial space, should they choose to pursue that after their military careers or fire department careers. And sometimes, we can get out of that habit in the fire department because our schedule is so wonky. I was on a 48-72. I'm sure you've worked probably every schedule there is out there. I've worked a 24-24. I've worked a 48-48 and a 48-72. I've worked a 24-48. Those schedules sometimes can make it challenging to create some of these habit forming behaviors. But again, that comes back to the discipline, like getting yourself set to, putting some action items in front of yourself, whether it's set a calendar invite for yourself to prompt you to do something. Like maybe sometimes it's just setting aside time to think. These are some of the things that I do to this day. My calendar is sometimes filled. I hack myself. I make sure that I set aside on Wednesdays 1:30 to 3:30 is like 2 hours of nothing. Like that's time for me to think. And so I set a calendar invite for myself to do that. So these sound like really small behaviors, but if you actually took the time to do some of these, man, they could really add up to some big dividends down the road. So that'd be some advice I'd give anybody.
That's fantastic advice. And my partner Ben's going to be mad at me because he says I bring up Jocko Willink in every episode.
Oh, dude.
He kind of messes with me, but I don't know, man. I guess I worship the guy or something. But he says, and if you're familiar with him, you know this, but discipline equals freedom. And initially when I heard that, I was like, okay, it's kind of it seemed like a bumper sticker kind of thing to me. And, but when he talked about it, I'm like, oh. So the whole premise is when you do things that you're supposed to do, the things that you're supposed to do, because you know what you're supposed to do,
Yep.
you have the freedom down the road to do what you want to do.
Yep.
Right. And then I guess to bring that in terms of a business, you have the freedom to expand within the state of Indiana or to expand across the nation if you consistently every day have discipline in the way that you conduct business. You're going to set yourself up for success for what you want. So yeah, discipline equals freedom. But I'd be remiss if I didn't bring that up. And I
got to piggyback then because
Go ahead.
Jocko is the man. Extreme ownership. So I have a 12-week training program to also parallel the fire department, right? So kind of like your CDCs. So I am completely ate up. We have
there you go.
We have a 12-week training program for you to become a crew chief in the company, which means you can run a 2-person team in our junk trucks. But your first 4 weeks is called your probationary period. So you're a probie for your first 4 weeks.
Man.
But you have to read in those first 4 weeks, every single person in my company has to read the book Extreme Ownership. And then not only do that, but they have to take a quiz on FireDawg's history. So in their first 4 weeks as a probie, they learn FireDawg's history of the company and what it means to be a fire dog and where it came from. So I pay homage to all my brothers and sisters out there. But then they also have to read the book Extreme Ownership. And we make each team member not only read the book, they can listen to it on audio too. So if they're more of an audio person, but they have to take a quiz. And the quiz is we pull out 20 questions from the book that we feel like teach really good leadership principles. So we ask the questions, they take the quiz. At the end of the quiz, we go over all the answers, just like in the book I'm sure you're familiar with. There's the application to business. Well, we take it a step further and say application to fire dogs. Because, man, I mean, just if there's ever a book out there that just really sums up the sound leadership principles, it's Extreme Ownership. So it's a mandatory reading.
No better foundational book. And that book personally changed my life in the way that I approach the day and work and everything else. That's a great idea though. Have your employees read that. It sounds like the culture is pretty awesome there. Sounds like it's a great place to work. Really investing in the learning and development and leadership of your employees.
Well, some of the guys might disagree with you on at June on a long day, but for a job that's heavy manual labor, we try to be more than just a junk removal company. We try to make sure we're teaching leadership principles, and because it's one of those deals where we tell everybody, we didn't always do this when we were hiring in the company, but as we've grown and matured, I tell everybody that we bring on the team that we're under no illusion that it's not your dream to be a junk remover, right? Unlike firefighting, that's a dream job for a lot of people, and it was for me. People don't dream about going into a junk removal company, but what we make a promise to them, and I think that this really speaks to leadership in the fire department too, which is reach one, teach one, and if somebody comes into our company, it's incumbent upon us to make sure that when they leave better than when they came. And I think that as a young NCO or a young officer in the firehouse, or maybe just a leader on the back seat, if you're in a position where you're over somebody, it's your responsibility to make sure that firefighter is better off having worked under you by the time they're done, or worked with you. You should always be trying to iron sharpens iron. That's always been something that philosophy I live by. And so our junk removal company, it's not sexy. It's not like a great career. It's not like a firefighter, right? But if we're going and approaching it where we're trying to make sure that everybody leaves the company better than when they came, that starts to feed into the whole team. And then you try to create this iron sharpens iron mindset.
Yeah. So what's the future look like for the business? What do you guys got planned? I mean, you mentioned expanding within the state. Is there anything else?
Yeah, the aim is, I don't know how familiar you are with Indiana, but, I'm big on strategy, and I don't make any bones about it. Our aim is to be able to service the entire state. So I want to have an operation in every city in the state of Indiana and continue to grow the company, pursue growth, not just, in between the years, but also I want to grow the company, and create opportunities for those team members that do want to stay with us and help us grow and be part of the future. So that's the plan, man. I got my big goal is state of Indiana by 2026. So, I like to put it out there and say it out loud. So I have to hold myself accountable to do it now, So I'll listen to this podcast in 4 years and say, nope, I said I was going to do it. I got to do it.
Yeah, there you go.
That's the big goal.
It's important to have aim.
Yeah.
No matter who you are. But yeah, that's awesome. I hope you do it. I look forward to seeing your successes. I follow you again on social media. And what's your social media handle for those that may be interested in following you? Yeah,
my wife is the brains behind the social media. But I think we're at FireDawg's Junk Removal on Instagram. It's FireDawg's Junk Removal on Facebook. For Firepreneurs, it's at Firepreneurs on Instagram and Firepreneurs on Facebook, and on we have a YouTube channel as well where we display the podcasts. But yeah, those are our outlets for those two pieces.
Cool. Well, Bennett, it was great talking to you, and man, we talked about some great stuff, and I know that there's some value to be had there, and especially those who are aspiring to own businesses at some point in their life. It was really great talking to you. I appreciate you sharing your insight. You got anything else you want to talk about?
No, that's it, brother, man. I appreciate your time. I like what you guys are doing. I've been a fan from day one. I hope you guys keep doing it and add value to the fire dogs out there, and I hope I did the same tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate your time, sir. You have a good one.
You too, man. Take care.
All right. Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of the FireDawg Podcast. You can find more commentary, articles, and episodes just like this regularly posted on our website, FireDawg.us. We're also on Facebook at facebook.com/the FireDawg Podcast, and on Instagram at the FireDawg Podcast. That is the Fire, DAWG Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and follow to stay plugged in every new episode, and give us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts if you've enjoyed this episode. Lastly, we'd love it if you'd share this podcast with your friends and coworkers, either on social media or right there at the firehouse. This is Matt Wilson with guest Bennett Grove. Until next time, stay safe.
Thanks for joining Firepreneurs today. We hope that we delivered value in your leadership journey. We humbly ask that you take the time to leave us a 5-star review, as that's how our podcast will rise in rankings and become available to more people. We'd love to hear from you, so you can email us by emailing firepreneurs@gmail.com. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or by watching us on our Firepreneurs YouTube channel. Stay hungry and get after it.